Sometimes the biggest setbacks lead to the most unexpected breakthroughs. In this inspiring story, a woman's job loss sets her on a path she never thought possible, opening doors to a new career she never knew she desired. This is the incredible story of how a sudden layoff led to a life-changing opportunity for a woman named Helen, something she never could have imagined. Watch and discover how she turned her misfortune into a blessing. And before I continue, do me a quick favor. Let me know where you're watching from in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with your loved ones. You never know who needs a little encouragement to keep pushing through new challenges. Now, let's get back to the story. If you ever strolled down the bustling streets of Victoria Island on a Monday morning, you might have spotted Helen Parker. She was not the kind of woman you would easily overlook in a crowd. Helen had a calm, quietly confident energy, like someone who always knew where she was going and how to get there. In a city where everyone seemed to be in a perpetual rush, dodging Danfo buses and street hawkers, Helen always managed to walk with an unhurried grace. At 32, Helen's life was, by all outward appearances, the picture of stability. She lived in a tidy two-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a cream-colored building with bougainvillea vines tumbling over the fence. Her mornings had a gentle, reliable rhythm. She would wake just before sunrise, spend a few quiet minutes on her small balcony with a cup of tea, and listen to the city come alive. The distant sound of mosque prayers mixed with the early crows of neighborhood roosters, and soon the first stirrings of Lagos traffic would begin to rise in the air. Helen's job was with Maple & Co., one of those mid-sized accounting firms where the AC always seemed just a bit too cold, and the scent of instant coffee lingered in every hallway. She had joined as a fresh-faced graduate 8 years ago, and over time she had carved out a comfortable spot as one of their lead auditors. It was not glamorous work. No one was writing movies about accountants in Lagos, but Helen genuinely loved it. There was a satisfaction in numbers that added up, in ledgers that balanced after a long week, in the soft click of her calculator as she worked late into the evening. She found pleasure in the small victories, like uncovering a tiny error that had thrown off an entire spreadsheet, or helping a client figure out a tax mess before the FIRS came knocking. Her colleagues often teased her for how seriously she took the annual Audit Olympics, a silly office tradition where teams competed to finish a fictional company's books the fastest. Helen always led her team to victory, her laughter echoing down the hall as they celebrated with cheap cupcakes and bottles of malt. Outside work, Helen had found a sense of community in her church choir and in Saturday brunches with her two best friends, Rebecca and Claire. They had all met at university, and somehow, despite the chaos of adulthood with job changes, heartbreaks, and family dramas, they still found time to meet in a cozy cafe on the street every weekend. Their conversations flowed from relationship woes to the best suya spots in town, from politics to Nollywood gossip. There was something comforting about that consistency, about the way her friends always managed to make her laugh until her sides ached. Helen's life, in those days, felt like a well-rehearsed song. She loved the routine of it, the way her week rolled out before her like a carefully planned schedule in her favorite pastel-colored notebook. She had a boss who respected her, clients who requested her by name, and an inbox that was always busy but never overwhelming. Every 2 months, she sent home to her parents in Enugu, and sometimes, when the traffic was light and the weather just right, she wondered if she had finally found that sweet spot everyone talked about, a balance between ambition and contentment. It is not that she didn't have dreams. Helen sometimes caught herself daydreaming about starting her own consultancy, or perhaps traveling outside Nigeria for a change, maybe to Ghana, or even further, to London or New York. But these were dreams she tucked away for later, like good shoes saved for a special occasion. For now there was work, and there was laughter, and there was the gentle, daily pleasure of a life that made sense. Even the small annoyances of Lagos living, like NEPA outages at odd hours, the occasional landlord drama,
or the chaotic morning commutes felt manageable within the steady rhythm of her days. She had learned how to turn inconveniences into stories, how to find humor in things she couldn't control. She was the one in the office who always had a witty comeback, who brought extra snacks to share during long meetings, who remembered birthdays and sent WhatsApp messages when someone was sick. Her world was, in short, safe. It was ordinary, yes, but it was hers. The comfort of familiarity wrapped itself around Helen like a warm blanket on a rainy day. She was not preparing for disaster nor waiting for something spectacular to happen. She was simply living. And for Helen Parker, that had always felt like enough. But as every Lagosian knows, life has a habit of changing without warning. On the day that everything began to unravel, Helen was the last person to suspect that the ordinary would soon give way to something extraordinary.
Helen never imagined that the thing she loved the most about her life, the gentle predictability of it, could shatter in just a few moments. But that is exactly what happened one Wednesday afternoon, beneath the humming glow of office lights that had always felt so familiar and safe. It started like any other day at Maple & Co. Helen arrived early, as usual, greeting the receptionist with her trademark smile and a quick chat about the weekend's Premier League matches. She walked the length of the corridor, heels clicking softly against polished tiles, passing the framed certificates and company awards that lined the walls. Her desk was by the window, overlooking a busy intersection, and she settled into her chair with a contented sigh, sipping from her favorite blue mug. There was an email from her boss, Mr. Johnson, marked urgent. Helen clicked it open, expecting yet another client request or last-minute change to an audit report. Instead, it was a meeting invitation. Please see me in my office at 10 a.m. Short, formal, unusual. She glanced at the clock and tried to ignore the slight flutter in her stomach. At exactly 10 a.m., Helen knocked on Mr. Johnson's door, balancing her notepad and a faint smile. The office was colder than usual, and her boss didn't look up right away. When he finally did, she noticed the worry lines creased deeper on his forehead. The conversation that followed would replay in her mind for days afterward, every word echoing louder than the last. Helen, you know how much we value your work. This is not easy for any of us. Mr. Johnson's voice was gentle, but his eyes darted uncomfortably. The company's going through restructuring. Our biggest clients have withdrawn. We've been forced to make difficult decisions, and unfortunately, your position is one of those affected. Helen stared at him, her mind grasping for meaning, as if he had spoken a foreign language. You mean, I'm being let go? He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. It's effective at the end of this week. You'll get a severance package, and of course, we'll provide a reference. Please know that this isn't a reflection of your performance. She didn't remember much of what else was said. She thanked him automatically, gathered her things, and walked out as if her shoes were made of lead. It felt like she was in a slow-motion scene, her familiar office suddenly foreign, the faces of colleagues blurring as she moved past them. No one met her gaze. A few people had already guessed what was happening, judging by the quiet sympathy in their eyes. Back at her desk, Helen sat in silence for several minutes. She tried to steady her breathing, blinking back tears that burned her eyes. Her computer screen seemed to swim in front of her, its glow no longer welcoming but harsh and cold. She stared at her carefully arranged files and the cheerful potted plant she'd watered every Monday. It all felt painfully temporary now. She didn't know how long she sat there before Rebecca's message popped up on her phone. "Lunch? My treat. You look like you need it." Helen managed a weak reply. As she packed her things, the ache in her chest grew sharper, and her hands shook slightly. Every step toward the exit felt like a small surrender, as if she was leaving a piece of herself behind with every stride. Lunch with Rebecca and Claire that afternoon felt different. They hugged her tightly, squeezing her hands, listening as she tried to put words to the confusion and fear swirling inside her. Rebecca's eyes flashed with anger on her behalf.
You gave them 8 years. They don't deserve you, Helen." Claire simply offered a napkin and a steady shoulder, letting Helen's tears flow freely for the first time since the meeting. The reality of it sank in slowly, in stages, as the days passed. The first night, Helen couldn't sleep at all. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of generators and the occasional dog barking on the street. She replayed every detail of her last day at work, wondering what she could have done differently, if anything could have changed the outcome. The following morning, she woke up and reached for her work clothes before remembering she had nowhere to go. It felt like falling, over and over again, into a void she didn't know existed. The routines that had once been her comfort now mocked her. She missed the structure, the quiet buzz of the office, the way her colleagues looked to her for answers, the simple satisfaction of a job well done. Each call from family and friends, though filled with sympathy, only deepened her sense of loss. Her parents in Enugu tried to comfort her, but Helen could hear the worry in their voices. She assured them she would be fine, that something else would come, but even as she spoke, she wasn't sure she believed it. Her confidence, once so solid, now felt like a thin sheet of glass that could shatter at
One Thursday afternoon, Helen sat at her dining table, staring blankly at her laptop. A fresh wave of rejection emails had come in that morning, each one more impersonal than the last. Her tea had long gone cold, and the faded sunlight that filtered through her window seemed to cast longer, heavier shadows across the room. She had spent most of the day rewriting her CV for the umpteenth time, scrolling through job boards and joining yet another online webinar about career pivoting in uncertain times. Her eyes burned from too much screen time, but she forced herself to keep looking, to keep hoping for a position that might finally fit. Around 4 p.m., her phone buzzed. It was a WhatsApp message from her old university friend, Daniel. They hadn't spoken in months, and the message felt almost intrusive in her new, quiet world. It simply read, "Helen, are you free to chat? I have a weird question." She almost ignored it, but something about Daniel's tone, light, almost apologetic, made her reply. Within minutes, he called. The line was clear, the Lagos background noise surprisingly muted. "Hey, Helen," Daniel said, sounding more cheerful than she remembered. "I know this is random, but I need help with something. I've started working for an NGO. We're organizing a financial literacy program for market women in Surulere, and honestly, our team is struggling to put together the materials. I remembered how you used to explain accounting to us at university. You made it sound easy, even fun." Helen gave a short laugh. Those were simpler times. "What exactly do you need?" Daniel explained that the program's goal was to teach basic bookkeeping and saving skills to market traders, many of them women who worked hard but rarely understood the basics of managing money or reinvesting in their small businesses. "The materials we have now are just boring and too complicated. We need someone who can simplify things and maybe even lead a few classes. It's not permanent, just a couple of weekends. The pay is small, but—" Helen almost cut him off, ready to say no. She was an auditor, trained in corporate finance, used to boardrooms and balance sheets. Teaching bookkeeping to traders in a noisy Lagos market was worlds away from what she'd built a career around. It sounded like a distraction, something people did to pass time while searching for their real job. But as Daniel spoke, she realized she didn't actually have a real job anymore. She had time, plenty of it. And truthfully, she was growing weary of endless job applications and the anxiety of waiting for replies that rarely came. Still, her doubts remained. Wasn't this beneath her? Would this actually help her career or just delay her progress? But Daniel was persistent, sending her the program outline and assuring her, "Honestly, Helen, they just need someone patient and good with people. You're perfect for this." That night, Helen lay awake thinking about the opportunity. It felt small and insignificant compared to her old life. It wasn't the consulting firm job she had dreamed of, nor did it come with a fancy office or a steady salary. Yet,
A strange curiosity began to nibble at her fears. What if she tried? What if instead of waiting for the perfect opportunity, she allowed herself to say yes to something unexpected? The next morning, she called Daniel back. "I'll do it," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. "I don't know if I'll be any good, but I'll try." Daniel was ecstatic. He quickly connected her with the NGO's coordinator, Mrs. Williams, a warm-voiced woman who sent Helen a flurry of documents, notes from past classes, and a schedule for the next weekend's workshop. Helen spent the following days preparing in a way she hadn't for weeks. She read through the program outline, watched videos on adult education, and even visited the Surulere market to get a feel for the place. The bustle and noise felt overwhelming at first, the air thick with the scent of spices, the shouts of traders, the clatter of coins. But there was an energy there she hadn't felt in months. When the first workshop day arrived, Helen dressed in a simple blouse and skirt, her nerves jangling. She stood before a group of 20 women seated on benches, their faces skeptical but hopeful. For a moment, Helen hesitated, wondering again if she belonged here. But then she remembered the confusion she'd seen in her mother's eyes years ago when Helen tried to explain how to track the profits from her small provision shop in Enugu. She remembered the relief on her mother's face when she finally understood. So, Helen began, voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each example she drew on the whiteboard. She used everyday language, telling stories about buying pepper, saving for children's school fees, and counting profit at the end of the week. To her surprise, the women responded, nodding, asking questions, even laughing at her jokes. By the end of the class, they were clapping for her, calling her Teacher Helen. Walking home that evening, Helen felt lighter than she had in weeks. The job was nothing like what she had imagined her next step would be, but for the first time since losing her job, she didn't feel invisible or left behind. She had taken a leap of faith, stepping into a world that was never part of her plan. It didn't feel like failure or a distraction. It felt just a little like a beginning.
The first few weeks of Helen's new path were anything but smooth. Teaching financial literacy to market women was a world apart from her old job at Maple & Co., and nothing had prepared her for the reality on ground. She quickly learned that most of the women she was meant to help were older than her, some old enough to be her mother. They had lived through decades of Lagos's booms and busts, raised children, paid rent, and survived through the sort of hustle that rarely made it into business textbooks. Helen discovered early on that patience was the most important skill she needed, far more than any accounting knowledge she brought along. Many of the women had little formal education and were immediately suspicious of big grammar. When she tried to introduce the basics of profit and loss using terms like revenue, capital, and expenditure, their faces glazed over. One of the oldest traders, Mamarita, interrupted her on the second day, shaking her head with a smile. "Auntie Helen, just talk to us the way we talk in this market. We don't want all this Oyibo English." Helen laughed, embarrassed but grateful for the honesty. She put aside her slides and began drawing examples on the whiteboard. If you buy a basket of tomatoes for 5,000 and sell it all for 7,000, how much have you made? The class came alive. The women shared stories of being cheated by suppliers, clever tricks for stretching a naira, and the creative ways they covered family expenses during hard months. It was not easy. Some days, Helen felt like giving up. The market was hot and noisy, the generator sputtered constantly, and every lesson required improvising on the spot. There were moments she doubted herself, wondering if she was really helping or just filling a gap for the NGO. But every time a woman stayed behind class to ask her to explain that thing about savings one more time or told her about a small profit made from applying her advice, Helen felt a quiet satisfaction she had never known behind an office desk. As the weeks passed, Helen grew more confident. She began weaving her own life stories into the lessons. She shared how her mother in Enugu struggled with a provision store until Helen helped her set up a simple records book. She talked about the importance of setting aside money, even just a little, before spending on family obligations. Her humility and openness earned the women's trust, and soon they brought their real-life problems to her. A daughter wanting to start her own business, a loan shark charging impossible interest, the stress of preparing for school fees. Helen found herself learning as much as she taught. She listened to tales of resilience and survival,
The pepper seller who started with just a tray and grew her stall over 10 years. The widow who sent 4 children to university by selling gari and pure water. Their resourcefulness humbled her. In the gaps between lessons, Helen picked up tips on bargaining, how to spot a good customer, even which days were best for buying bulk goods. She realized, often with wonder, that these women were entrepreneurs in the truest sense, creative, courageous, and endlessly adaptable. The shift in Helen was subtle at first. She stopped obsessing over job search websites and started looking forward to her classes at the market. Her mornings gained new energy. She no longer felt the dread that had haunted her after she lost her job. Instead, she woke up curious. What story would she hear today? What problem would she help solve? One Friday after class, Mama Rita pressed a warm hand to Helen's arm. "You don't know what you are doing for us, my dear. No one has ever explained money like this before. I wish someone taught me when I was a young woman." Helen was touched. For the first time, she saw her old skills in a new light. All those years balancing spreadsheets, tracking numbers, and making sense of finances were not wasted. She was simply using them in a way she had never imagined, breaking complex ideas into simple steps, connecting with people, making a difference. Gradually, Helen noticed changes in herself. She grew more comfortable speaking in front of a crowd, handling interruptions, and responding with kindness when someone was frustrated or confused. Her problem-solving skills found new life in the chaos of the market, where nothing ever went exactly as planned. She was forced to adapt, to learn, and to keep her sense of humor. Outside work, her friends saw the difference too. Rebecca joked that Helen now sounded like one of those motivational speakers when she talked about her week. Claire noticed that Helen laughed more, and her eyes sparkled with the excitement of someone who had discovered something meaningful. Even Helen's parents, initially worried that she was wasting time, heard the hope in her voice during phone calls and began to believe that this might be more than just a phase. The impact of her work stretched beyond the market. The NGO took note of her unique approach, inviting her to help design new programs for other communities. Helen started receiving invitations to speak at women's groups and even churches. She realized that her passion was not only for numbers but for people, for lifting others up, for sharing knowledge, for helping women like her mother feel empowered in a world that often overlooked them. Her sense of purpose deepened. She was no longer haunted by thoughts of what she had lost. Instead, she was inspired by what she was building. Her financial worries eased too, as the NGO offered her a permanent position and other organizations reached out for opportunities for consulting and workshops. Looking back, Helen was amazed at how far she had come in just a few months. She had found purpose where she least expected it, passion in work that seemed ordinary, and growth in challenges that once frightened her. What began as an unwanted detour had become a journey into a richer, more meaningful life, one where her skills and heart finally aligned and where she too was growing into the best version of herself.